Hello, welcome to this next Substance Designer tutorial. We're going to do something a bit more extensive this time. We're going to create a little ground map, and as with all these things, we start out with a graph. So I've just launched Designer, and we'll go up to Substance Graph here, and we'll call it ground imaginatively. I'll go 2048 relative to parent, new package, and click OK. There we go. So now we've got our windows up. Just move that over to one side. Now with a ground, we want to, well actually with almost everything, we want to start with the big features. So the general process is you start at the very big features, and then you move down to kind of the middle or medium, and then you go down to the very fine detail sort of towards the end. So for a ground then, we're going to need a noise initially. So I'm going to press the space bar and type in Perlin, and we would just want the standard Perlin noise. And now we're going to use our height information and normal information to visualize this. Let me just switch this scene over to a high-res plane for the moment. I'm going to plug my Perlin noise into my normal to give me my basic surface information, and into the height to give some height information. And then we can see that this isn't very small detail or very large detail, which is what we're after. So on the Perlin noise, in the properties, we're going to reduce the scale sort of between somewhere between 1, well not 1, that's too small, and 5. There we go. Now it's quite difficult to see now that we've got down to that really kind of large detail. So I'm just going to go to my materials here, go default and edit, and I'm going to increase my height information. So let's take our height scale and just bring it up a bit. Now you can see it's displacing and doing a bit more, but still visually it's not very easy to read. So we're going to use an ambient occlusion node to make it a bit easier. So if I press space in the graph and type in ambient, I'm going to use the ambient occlusion HBAO, and then we'll plug our height map into there, our Perlin, and then we'll plug the Perlin into the ambient occlusion node. And now it's a little more visible, but we have our we have some parameters we can adjust to make it even more so. So if I increase the depth, you'll see I get more range, darker patches and much lighter patches, and that makes it a little bit more visible. Okay, so let's take these two out of the way. We're not using those, so I'm going to delete those to keep my graph nice and neat. Okay, so let me just go back here and have a look at my Perlin noise. I think I want a smaller value than this. I might go down to 3. Yep, that's much nicer, much more broad, not detailed at all, but just giving us a general kind of overall shape. Okay, so in the next one we'll start to look at going down a level and increasing our detail to get the medium middle values. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so what I want to do here is to create some finer detail, not too detailed, but somewhat between large and small. So we're going to add a noise in, so I'll press the space bar, and this time I'm going to use a cloud, and I'm going to use clouds 2, mostly because it's quite broad, but as you zoom in you'll see that there is more and more and more detail. The closer you go, you have to get really quite close to not see kind of little clumps and patterns. So we're going to use that one combined with our Perlin noise here to blend some things together. So let's use a blend. So I'm going to press the space bar and type in blend, and we'll pop that somewhere around there, and I'm going to drag that into the background, and I'll drag this into the foreground, and this is the result. Now this is the result because the default value for this is copy, the default mode, and the default opacity is 1. Now 1 means I'm going to see everything that's plugged into the top foreground node here. So if I kind of drag that back, you'll see that it starts to give me more of a blend between the two. If I go right down to 0, I'll just see, you know, the purling noise, and as I bring it up, I'll start to get some detail in. So I'm just going to drag that up a little bit, just a bit, just to start to get some noise going on in there. And now essentially I want to replug all of our values here into our outputs. There we go, and that's what we get. So now we've got like a much more detailed kind of map, but we're changing basically the way, you know, we're adding detail the more and more we go down. Now as it stands, this is not necessarily what I was after, because that's too fine for me, it's too much detail. What I want to do is build this up very, very gradually. So actually I'm going to switch this node out. I'm going to delete it, and then space, and whoops, let's go noise again, and I'm just going to add a second purlin. Actually let's just type purlin, it's making my life difficult otherwise, and I'll plug that into the top, and that's really a lot of detail. So all we need to do on our purlin noise is bring our scale down, but not as far as we brought it down initially. We're just adding a little bit in, and that changes how I would do the blend. So I might take that down to 0.5 instead, so we'll have a 50-50 blend to get those in. Perhaps less than that actually. Let's go down to 2.5. There we go. So now we've added some extra, you know, extra noise in there, extra detail, but it's not, you know, how can I put it, super detailed yet. We need to add additional things to this to do that. Okay, so what we'll do in the next video is we'll add some finer detail to this to, you know, start to make it look like a rocky, or, you know, a rough ground. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so I used the clouds node in the last one by mistake, and that's my fault. But we're going to start to use that sort of thing now. So let's add in a new noise to get a little bit more detail in. Now if I just type in noise, we'll get all sorts of different noises up. So what I like to do at some point in time is use a spots one, and you know, I use it quite early on because it's not very detailed, but it's, you know, more detailed than a really low purlin. So let's where are we? Black and white spots. So black and white spots 3 gives us something along these lines. It's lots of spots that have been overdone, and I can increase my scale and disorder here, and this is just going to start to break up the very smooth profile we have currently into something a little bit more broken and jagged and rocky. So I'm going to put that above my blend and then add a new blend, and then I'm going to plug that one into the top and that one into the bottom. I'll just double click to see what that looks like. Of course we used it in its very simplest form last time, so we used the copy and we just adjusted the opacity to get a blend there, but this time we're going to use a different blend mode. So we use multiply, and that's what we get. Now if that's too harsh, which I believe it is, we can still use the opacity slider to bring that back in again. So I'm just taking that back down just until it starts to, or we can start to see that those spots noises coming in there. Okay, so now last time we also reconnected all of these manually, and we don't need to do that. If we shift left click on our blend which is currently plugging into all of these, we can plug it into the output of our new blend, and what that then does is it knows it's plugged into itself, or it's plugged into, you know, both blends. It understands that and then reroutes all of the other ones to, you know, the appropriate outputs. Now looking at it, that is still looking a little bit too much. So what I can do, that might be down to my ambient node, and for example if I take my depth down, should start to look a little bit more sensible, and I could change the radius a little just to get that going. So now we have our broad shape, but we also have these very small, you know, or quite small rough details that's giving us an overall pattern change, an overall texture, but isn't really, you know, all that exciting. I am going to adjust my opacity down a little bit here as well, just so that I don't lose too much of the big shape to that small detail, or smaller detail anyway. Okay, one last thing here. I'm just going to go to Materials, Default and Edit, and then I might increase my height scale a little bit just to get a little bit more of an exaggerated view there. Okay, so next then, unsurprisingly enough, we're going to add some more detail, and this time even finer and possibly more localized, but we'll see. Okay, so I will talk to you then. Okay, so we want to add some additional detail now. Now all I've done is between videos is I've kind of lined up my noises and put them on one level, and lined up my blends and put them on a second one, and that just helps me visualize, you know, kind of the flow of what's going on. So we want to add some more detail now, and actually I'm going to go to my ambient node and just increase that because I'm not seeing very much going on here. There we go, that's better. So we're going to add some more detail into this. So let's pick a node. I'm going to pick a dirt and press the space bar and type in dirt, and I'll use dirt 4 because, you know, there's quite a lot going on in there. I've got a good range of values from darks to lights, and it's got some kind of streaks in it which is going to, you know, be quite interesting, I think. Okay, so for this one we'll add our blend then and pop that there. I'll plug the dirt into the top, and I'll plug the previous blend into the middle, and then shift left click and switch those outputs over. So as you can see, that's gone quite mad, and that's because our blend mode is a little bit, how can I put it, over the top. So I'm going to switch this to an add, and as you can see, it's still very much over the top, and all we need to do is feather back this opacity until we get to a point where we're happy. So that's without any blend, and if I just let that go up a little bit, just in little increments, we'll start to get something interesting. So let's zoom in. So it's very detailed now, and yes, I think perhaps a little too. So what I'm going to do is pop a levels in between these, these values are essentially between 0 and 1, and there's a lot of noughts and there's a lot of ones because there's a lot of black and there's a lot of white, and I want to level that up a little bit. So yeah, pun not intended, or link not intended. So if I select a noodle, that's what they're called, and press space, I can type levels and it will plug in a levels node between the two. And then in our properties over here on the levels, what I can do is perhaps take some of the larger values out. So white is 1, and if I take the output white and reduce it and reduce it and reduce it, it will further make the effect more subtle. So this is what our map looked like before. This is what it looks like on the levels. See, if we were adding 0 does nothing, you know, adding small numbers does a little bit. And we can go back to the blend. We've got quite a low value here. If I increase this, you'll see that it goes a bit mad, but not as bad as it used to. But I could perhaps afford a little less opacity, there we go, than we originally decided. So that's not a bad ground really, you know, as a very plain ground would go, but we do need to add some more detail to it, and I'm going to add some kind of lumpy, pebbly details in the next section, so we'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's move our graph back a bit to give myself some space. There we go, just move that up there, and then we'll add in a new noise node. So let's try, what should we try? Let's go spots. I'm going to use Gaussian spots 1. Let's get this nice kind of diffuse, smooth, kind of blended map here. And then we need a blend, so space and blend. And then I'm going to plug the previous blend into the bottom, the new noise into the top, and this time we're going to use screen, which is just going to basically overlay the images. So if I select that to that, you'll see that that's what we get. And when I move this over with shift and left click, we'll see the result. So that's a bit too much, isn't it? You know, so we can take the opacity down a little, but we can also go back and adjust these values with a screen and perhaps even a blur. Well, first of all, I can make them smaller by increasing the scale, which is essentially what I want to do, because I don't want them to be that big. So let's take the scale right to about there, I think. But then I want fewer values. There, you know, this is a very dense kind of look. So if I now put a levels in, so select the noodle, press space, type levels, add the node. We can now adjust our values appropriately. So if I take the white input down, you'll see I get a lot more white. If I take the gamma down or up, it's rather what I wanted to do, you'll see I start to get a more dispersed map. And if I take the black, I'll get an even more you know, finer pattern. Now they're all looking a little bit a little bit spiky, and that might be because I've taken my scale down a little too far. So let's move that around until I get something that's a bit less. Now that's now getting too little, which is typical. So I can come back in here and I can adjust perhaps the gamma to get some values back. There we go. That's looking nice and kind of rocky and pebbly. And I can take my screen to bring that height down take the opacity screen rather, or the opacity on my blend node, to bring that right down. There we go. Now we have something that looks like the base of a terrain. You know, we've got kind of general overall texture. We've got some you know, big values which are giving us a kind of rough terrain height, and we've got something that's more or less in the middle to, you know, break up that stuff. I'm not actually happy with the blend between these, so I think I'm not getting enough fall off there, so what I'm going to do is just move that up there for a bit and then click the noodle. I'm just going to put a blur in between just to soften that up a bit. There we go. So the blur has completely killed it, so if I bring this back we should get something a little softer. So you can see that it's just getting quite blocky, and that's a function of this particular blur. If you go too high, that will happen. So you might need a very low value. You could replace this with an HQ blur, which is heavier in terms of resources and processing time, so it might slow you down a bit, but will give you a better quality. But I think that's enough. Should do us the job. There we go. Okay, so in the next section we'll move on to adding some more detail, I think. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so up to now we've been working with noises, or noise patterns. So I'm just going to select all of these, and what do we want? I want to frame them. Where's frame gone? Add frame. There we go. So I'll just call these noises, and what we're going to do now is create some more defined patterns or defined shapes, something that's going to look more like a rock. So I'm going to press space down here and pick shape, and for this shape we're going to increase the tiling, say to 4. Can't see anything yet because I haven't changed the shape, and then I'll change the shape to a paraboloid. Actually I don't want that much, let's take it down to 2. There we go. So we've got 4 shapes, and now we're going to process these to make them look you know, a bit more organic. So the first thing I need is a warp, so I'm going to press space and type in warp, and then for the warp what we need is our shape input here, and then a gradient input, and the gradient input is going to tell it how to warp our shapes. So I'm going to just press space and type Perlin because I want quite a broad pattern, and I'll plug that in and we'll see what we get. It's a bit of a mess, so that's because we're a bit too noisy, so I'll take the scale down until we get something a little bit more sensible. So that's quite nice. They're quite close together though, so what I'm going to do is go to my scale here and just scale these down a bit so that there's a bit more space between them. There we go. So now we've got essentially 4 reasonably different pebble shapes or rock shapes, but they're a little too amorphous, is that the word? A little too kind of just blobby. I want to put some kind of ridges into them, so for that we'll use a directional blur. There we go, and it's very similar. We're going to plug our output into there. Actually it's not a directional blur, is it? It's a slope blur. Sorry about that. So slope blur grayscale, and we'll plug our Perlin noise into the bottom one. There we go. Sorry, the slope input, and then the grayscale is our shapes, and now we get this, which is something a little bit more how can I put it, angular, stony, you know, organic. But but this isn't really what I want. These are a little bit harsh, so what I can do is take the intensity down and it will soften them up. But we also want to change our mode. So currently mode is just going to blur. If you imagine the samples as different images, you know, just offset ever so slightly, the mode is what it does to those. So we've got 8 samples, so currently we're blurring 8 images together. If I take that to min, you'll see it kind of trims the outside because it's taking the minimum value from each of those images. And if I take it to max, it's going to blow out a little bit because it's taking the maximum from each. So in this case I want it to be minimum, and that gives me a nice little rocky kind of look. And if I increase the samples, it will smooth out. If I reduce the samples, yeah, I'm going to get a lower quality, maybe even ridged kind of result. So then we can mess about with the intensity until we get something that we want. So at this end it's very harsh, and if I take it down a little bit, I'll get something that's a little bit more like it. And I think that's about right. I'm getting kind of ridges and planes, and that's quite nice. Okay, so that's defined a whole bunch of different rocks, and if you want to, you can actually just increase your tiling here and you'll get a different selection. Just be careful, because we're going to have to hand pick almost these rocks, and the more you have, the tighter it's going to be to do that selecting. So to actually do that selection, what we can do is use a crop node. So if I press space and type crop and pick crop grayscale, I can plug that in there, and then with the area output here, so if you click on these outputs, it will show you what it's doing. I get this nice little box, and I can move that over my picture there, and now it's picking that one. There we go. And if I double click on the output area there, our output preview shows that. So what I want is to pick some rocks. I want all 4 of these, and I want to use them all. So I'm going to duplicate this with a Control and D, and then click on the area, whoops, double click on there, and then move that over to my next rock. Just making sure I'm getting all of it. Double click there to see what I've managed. There we go, that's good. So we'll Control D this one, double click on the area, move to select our next rock, and then whoops, one more, so Control and D to duplicate, and we'll drag that over to that one there. There we go. Okay, so we've now selected our rocks, or sculpted almost, and we've got all of our outputs, but now actually what we want to do is combine them into our background map here, and scatter them across the whole, which we'll do in the next video with a Shape Splatter node. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so now we want to scatter these across our terrain, and for that we'll need a splatter node. So if I press space here and type in shape, we'll pick the Shape Splatter. And now this gives us a few inputs, and you'll see our top one is our background height, which is our previous blend node. So if I plug that into the top one there, and I'm going to shift click and take that into our output there so that we maintain, and below that we've got patterns. So if I click in this Shape Splatter and go to, whoops, am I in the right place? Instance parameters, go to pattern, I can increase my pattern input number to 4, and then I can plug each of my rock shapes here into that. So let's drag and drop 1, as you can see, they've now populated, and as I plug them in, it will fill in the gaps in the grid. Now, this is all very kind of uniform at the moment, so we need to make it a little bit more random. So first of all, we can change our scale options here. So if I take scale random here and take it up, you'll see they all become, you know, randomly scaled. The overall scale of each shape is going to be controlled here, and I want there to be some much bigger ones there. There we go. Now that's not very good because, you know, that's kind of over masking underneath. It might be suitable for some reasons, but not for what I'm doing now. So I'm going to go down to the masking area and update my random mask value to take out quite a lot of them. There we go. Okay, so back to size. Let me increase my sizes here. There we go, something along those lines. I'm just going to draw back here and press the space bar with that clicked in, just to make sure that it's going to tile, and it is, which is perfect. Spacebar shows you a tiling preview essentially with the red box outlining, you know, what you're working on. I was a little bit concerned about this rock here, and looking at the other side, I guess that should be alright. Okay, so scale, let's take that up and down. Yep, we have a scale no overlap. The more you update that, the smaller things are going to get, because it's just basically scaling them until there's no overlap. But let's see how far we can push this. There we go. So that looks pretty good. But you'll notice that, you know, these are kind of extruding from the background height. You see down here we've got this kind of you know, smear, which means that, you know, it's just transferring out. We can change that in the height properties. If we go down to conform to background, it will interpolate between the two and rotate the rocks to conform. So if I increase that, you should see that that happens. It does add in the texture from the ground, which is not bad at this point in time. You know, it actually is just adding to the underground and not adding extra rocks. These are a part of the original terrain. Okay, so what else do we have? Well, we have the amounts, we have masking, we've done masking. Height, we can do a height offset. So currently these are kind of offset at 0, so they're just sitting on top. But we can sink these down a little bit so that they are kind of, yeah, underlying features which are just you know, warping and you know, morphing the top soil or top, you know, rock or whatever. We can have a height offset random just to add a little bit of randomness into that. What else haven't we looked at? Position we've looked at. Oh no, that's what I haven't done actually. So we changed the scale, but we didn't change the positions. So we can add a random position in, and it will start to move each point around randomly to, you know, the to each other. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words today. I'm not entirely sure what's up with me. Well, we have a baby in the house, very disruptive. They are no respecters of peace and quiet, that's for sure. Okay, so that's Shape Splatter node, and I've used this for some large shapes, but I'm going to create a new Shape Splatter, and we're going to do some smaller shapes to further build our background. So I shall talk to you then. Okay, so we're going to use a second Shape Splatter node, and we're going to chain them together to get, you know, get everything blending. So if we come over here, actually I think I probably should move some of these up a bit. Whoops. Oh, oh goodness, John, sort your life out. There we go. So I'm going to add another splatter node. So we'll type in splatter. Whoops. And we want the shape splatter. Now I want to pop this into my background input or background height, and then shift and left click and drag the output from there into there. So nothing will change, it's just changing the output. So what we can do here is create smaller patterns. So for that, what we can do is simply increase the X and Y amount. So if I put this up to say 50 and that one to 50, that automatically kind of just scales everything down because you've only got so much, you know, space to put them in. So what I want to do is put some slightly different shapes into here, some slightly more sort of noisy shapes. So what I'm going to do is, well, you could either do it from back here, or I could process each of these, and I'm going to process each of these, I think. So I'm going to use a slope blur grayscale. So I'll grab that one and plug my shape from here and pop that into shape 1, which is all the shapes at the moment because I haven't introduced, or I haven't increased my pattern size. And then we're going to create a new noise to plug into this slope blur. So this time I want a noisier noise. So, you know, previously we used a purlin, which is quite smooth and, you know, transitiony, but I want something noisier. So let me just press space and type noise, and then we can have a look down and see what we've got. So I want something that's got quite a lot of detail in it, but not necessarily too, what am I trying to say? Don't know what I'm trying to say. Not too uniform. So let's have a look. Let's try clouds. So I'm going to pick a clouds 2, and then we'll plug that into there. And if I have a look at that, you'll see that it's giving us a lot more detail in there. It's taking those, you know, broad shapes and really noisying them up. But it's also spread things out a little bit, so we might be able to adjust that with some of these values here. I could reduce the intensity. Yep. Yeah, that's not too bad. So as you can see, that's put that across all of our model. And before I'll go in and I'll recreate these in, you know, between videos, but I just want to come in here and adjust it to get it how we want it. So we've got a 50 by 50. We'll increase our scale here and add some scale random. And you can see it's really starting to change up there. If I go now down to masking, obviously I have too much. Oops, there we go. So I'll mask random until I get a nice kind of level, perhaps a little less than that, or more rather. There we go. We can go to rotation and increase our rotation differences, and in height I want to conform to background again, so we'll do that. See, that should make a real difference because it's, you know, just merging it with the texture to our background. And what else should we do? We'll take the offset down a little bit just to bury that into the ground. So now we have, you know, a much rougher ground. You know, we've got many more small details you can see in our picture here. We can perhaps increase the masking. And did I do scale? Let's have a look at scale. Scale random, let's put that up to 1. And perhaps if I want them smaller, I'll just take the overall scale and reduce that a little bit. There we go. So I mean that's more or less the ground done, but as I said, we just need to duplicate this for the other patterns. So if I come into here and go to my pattern inputs, I'm going to set it to 4, and all I'm going to do between videos is well, this. I'm going to copy this slope blur with a Control D, and then plug my second shape into it, and then plug that into pattern 2. I'll do that for all of them. I could use a different clouds node, I could change that up, but you know, it's quite a small detail. I don't think anybody will be able to tell, and the more of these I add to it, the more overhead on the graph there is, so it will essentially slow down. So I'll add a few more bits into there between videos, and when we come back, I think we're going to start to actually build on top of our ground now. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so I want to add to this to add a different kind of feature. Everything's blobs at the moment. Everything's, you know, different kind of shaped blobs, and I want to add some kind of directional swirl kind of effect in here. So what I'm going to do is just build a separate pattern. Actually, I'm just going to organise these a little bit. So let's grab those ones, right click and add a frame. This is our large splatter. Oops. This we'll be able to identify it relatively easily once we get around to it. So let's select these ones, just drag those down there, add a frame. Where's the frame? There it is, and we'll call this one small splatter. Okay, I'm going to move these down so that they're parallel with our last output. There we go. Okay, so let's add in some sort of noise here. So what I want is a noise, and I think I want something that's got kind of a direction to it. So we've got some directional noises, and that one's quite fibrous. I think we'll have a go with this one. Okay, so for this one then we want to blend it with something to break it up. So I'm going to press space rather, and then we'll type in grunge, and I want to pick one that's basically got a lot of black bits in it and some white patches. So we'll have that one there, and I want this inverted, so we'll press invert and then we'll blend together. So I'll pop that one in the top and that one in the bottom. Actually, I think I want it the other way around, so let's do that now, and let's set that to subtract. So now I've got these patches that have got little bits of directional kind of fibres in them, but they're all going in one direction. So what I want to do is add a warp to this, and I'll plug that into the top, and then we need a pattern to warp it with, so I'm just going to use a purlin, and we'll drag that into there. There we go, double click on that and we'll see what we've got. And now we start to get some kind of swirls and knots, almost wood knots, but we can adjust that by perhaps reducing the scale of our purlin and get it to a point where you like it, and we can even adjust the intensity to simplify it a little bit. So let me just press space in there. Yes, it tiles. Let's press space to untile it again, and now we can add it in. Now you've got a choice here. You can either add it in after, which is basically going to go on top of what we've got here, or we could add it between these. I think I might want to add it between, so I'm just going to grab this frame and move that right out of the way. Whoops. Grab these and put them up. and instead of using this as our output, I'm going to use this one or our input rather. I'm going to use this one instead, so I'll just drag and drop that. Oh, I'm not using anything as an input at the moment. Ah, that's good. I was kind of concerned I would have a kind of circular input there. Okay, so currently this is feeding into, or this splatter is feeding into this splatter, but I want to blend these and then feed it in down there. So let's press space and pop in a blend. I want this one to be, whoops, not close enough, that's a problem. I want that one to be in the top and that one to be in the bottom, and then I'll just take my opacity until I start to get those little swirls coming in. As you can see down here, we're getting those coming in nicely. We could try a different blend mode, say multiply or subtract. No, let's try add. Yeah, but it's all a bit much. I could change my opacity down, but I think copy here is just going to do me quite nicely. So now, instead of plugging this into our background of this splatter, I'm going to plug this one instead. There we go, and now we've got our swirly bits, but we're putting our small rocky bits over the top of it. So let me move that over to there. I'll move these over to here and right click and add a frame, and we'll call this frame Swirls. There we go. Now I've gone so far with it. You can go as far as you like and get it more and more complicated, but what I would say is, you know, the further you go the more detailed it will look, and the more, you know, you'll get, the more you'll get, but at some point in time it's going to become too muddy, and you know, you have to stop somewhere, and for the purposes of demonstration I'm stopping here for this bit at least. I think in the next video what we'll do is take this height information and we'll use it you know, to make a material. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. I hope you found it useful. I hope you find the result useful. I'm just going to go in here and edit my material and go to my height level. Going to over crank this to say 100, see what we get. Yeah, it's crazy. So let's just drag that down until it looks nice, somewhere around there. I think even there it's still too much, so let's just bring it down, yeah, just a little bit above where we started. Yes, so yes, we'll start in the next bit, in the next video. We'll start to derive the other maps. So we obviously need our roughness maps and maybe some colour maps and so on and so forth to get a proper material out. So I hope to talk to you then.